Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this regional session of the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit Digital Series, focusing on building digital capabilities for inclusive and sustainable industrialization in Africa. My name is Fifi Peters, and I am your host of this session, brought to you by the co-chairs of the GMIS initiative, the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology of the United Arab Emirates, and the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Our co-hosts today are the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Ethiopia. Our sincerest thanks to them. The fourth industrial revolution is a hot topic of conversation amongst many in Africa, and I'm sure you're looking forward to discussing these issues and hearing what our cross-disciplinary expert panel has to say. We will now hear a keynote, an introductory address from the State Minister of Trade Industry of Ethiopia, Mr. Dege Gebreyesus.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of the government of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia and my own behalf, I would like to thank UNIDO for inviting me to deliver a keynote speech at this special regional webinar event organized within the context of the Global Manufacturing Industry Summit Digital Series 2021. Taking the opportunity, I wish to congratulate the Director General, Liu Yong, for impeccable leadership, commitment, dedication to industrial sector development in general, and for regularly organizing topical platforms such as today's event, which can go a long way to keep member states delegates abreast with new and novel development in a fast-changing global industrial ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, this special event is addressing one of the overriding themes of our time: the modernization, digitalization of the industrial sector, the potential of digitalization and digital manufacturing for achieving SDG 9, inclusive and sustainable industrialization, on which policies and partnership model can be utilized to this end, and how international cooperation can accelerate the process. As usual, I must say this is a very pertinent and timely topic selected by UNIDO for member states to exchange views, insights, experiences that would help them gear, direct, and align their policy stand, plan, strategy, intervention, assisted by modern digital technologies. As mentioned earlier, as a digital transformation is a very broad topic, I will highlight Ethiopia's national plan strategy and how the country tries to boost its digital infrastructure and how multi-stakeholders partnership can assist in this endeavor. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last 15 years, Ethiopia has made a concerted effort to fast-track the industrialization process, registering one of the fastest economic growth in the world, with due focus to agricultural transformation as a milestone for industrialization, prioritizing labor-intensive light manufacturing sectors such as textile, leather, food processing, with minimal technology advancements. Recently, in its attempt to catch up with the fast digitalizing world, the country has unveiled an ambitious digital transformation strategy, Digital Ethiopia 2025. A national strategy set to transform the country's national economy in the coming 5 years through 4 major sector-related pathways, including agriculture, manufacturing, IT-enabled services, and tourism. Approved in 2020, the strategy builds on Ethiopian global economy, economic advantage like lower wage costs, putting the private sector at the forefront, and aims to give investment guidance, promote competition, and create a favorable business environment. Furthermore, this strategy is expected to set Ethiopia on fast-paced trajectory to competitive telecoms market digitalize government services, harness innovation like artificial intelligence. There is a real optimism in relation to the strategy, as there are a lot of opportunities and likelihoods for Ethiopia to be transformed into digital economy, including the fact that Ethiopia has a young population, 70%, with large proportion of its educated, dynamic, and trainable workforces. The commitment of the government, a functioning and dedicated institutional setup, and conducive legal and policy framework. It is hope turning this opportunity into reality will lead to advance in public services in the form of e-government, for instance. Ventures like the online trade registration and licensing system, electronic single window, customs clearance, and electronic tax filing will be in place, simplifying and speeding up the business and public sector process. Innovation hubs and startup accelerators will be important for accelerating the promotion of local entrepreneurship. In relation to the latter, digital centers are being created in countries such as the recently inaugurated Orange Digital Center in Addis Ababa. Ladies and gentlemen, the international business community is looking for opportunities in the light manufacturing sector at increasing numbers, and countries turning into an important hub and attractive for investment, partly because of the competitive and affordable labor and electric costs, and also other factors such as the African Growth Opportunity Act and the EBA, everything but arms, free trade privilege the country enjoys, and the state-of-the-art industrial parks. It's important to note here that entrepreneurs have been investing in Ethiopia's industrial parks on advanced technologies, creating an opportunity for Ethiopians to succeed in adopting digital-enabled solutions and remain competitive. But again, bringing to the fore the need for fast and reliable connectivity. Internet connectivity is important in industrial park and zones. Logistic management approach is also needed to be post-export, the ability to deliver product on the given time and within affordable cost from the point of origin to the final destination is essential for competitiveness. The government has been heavily investing in improving transport infrastructures, such as the railroad linking Addis Ababa to Djibouti. Efforts are underway to expand the Mojo and other dry ports with state-of-the-art technology and other customs-related improvements. It is must continue to pay greater attention to trade logistics, particularly learning the interface between import, digitalization, and trade logistics. And successful manufactured goods export delivery involves diverse products as priority into main areas. One is the manufacturing goods that are more and more digitalized. Thus, e-commerce is a critical export channel as the e-commerce policies are in progress. Second is improving efficiency through easing customs procedure that paves the way to improve Ethiopia's export performance. Excellence, ladies and gentlemen, digitalization would be unthinkable without properly developed electronics and ICT industries, which is currently playing only a modest role in Ethiopia's economy. It is very much in its infancy. However, various studies suggest that the short-term potential to develop investment in ICT and electronics is strong, and Ethiopia has a competitive advantage compared with direct regional competitors in Africa. In summary, to spur growth in the ICT and electronics sector and expedite the digitalization of economy in Ethiopia and much broadly in Africa, 5 critical points need to be given due consideration. Firstly, it's important to address logistic challenges. Secondly, there is a need for continued development of infrastructure, associated services, so that plug-and-play environment is created and investors operate without much hassle. Third, it's about upgrading customs administration, customs processing system. Fourth, putting in place harmonized and inclusive policies. Fifth, there is a need for continued skill development for the sector. In the end, the ICT and electronic sector development activities should be complemented by proactive investment promotion efforts. Excellence, ladies and gentlemen, it should be realized achieving the above in an intensive and complex challenge and will require synergy, complementarity, and effective coordination among government agencies and partners. And this is where multi-stakeholders platforms such as the Program for Country Partnership, PCP, come in handy. In the Ethiopian case, thanks to the PCP, key government agencies, development partners, including the development financial institutions, managed to put their acts together, mobilizing a whopping over 1.9 billion USD, provide a whole range technical and professional support in concerned manner to build and avail modern industrial infrastructure and services. In the same spirit, such platform should be used in digitalization endeavor of our economies. Finally, in conclusion, I must reiterate that technology sector is still small in Ethiopia, but the government is investing in incubation hubs to unleash the power of its large pool of tech-savvy youth. Ethiopia's advantage in the large number of science, technology, energy, mathematics, educated graduates who are beginning to enter the job market following the government's investments in higher education. Furthermore, the government is determined to have the private sector in the driving seat and lead economic transformation. The state-owned companies in telecoms, banking, aviation could soon offer stake to private investors, a process likely to open up opportunities for tech companies. Ethiopia's startup community has been operating in the background and taking advantage of improved business environments. This community could help to scale up and propel the countries into digital hub. The reality at the continent level also gives reason for optimism. We in Africa, we must push for greater economic integration. In the digital area, regional economic integration entails more than just physical connectivity. Africa countries need to integrate digitalization into their national development strategies and plan, and facilitate for the private sector to work collaboratively with the government in both policy formulation and implementation. The All-African Free Continental Trade Agreement is a good start and move in the right direction that we need to build up on the create more initiatives for mutual economic growth and transformation. The African Union regional economic committees are duty-bound to spearhead such efforts for common goods. It's my sincere hope that development partners such as UNIDO will rise to task and make sure Africa is not left behind in harnessing digital technology to build modern, competitive industrial societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gebriosis, for those thoughts on the upscaling of digital manufacturing in Africa. And in this final keynote address, UNIDO Director General, Mr. Lee Yong, will provide a global perspective on the fourth industrial revolution. Mr. Lee, the floor is yours, sir.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of addressing this distinguished forum today, focusing on building digital capacities for inclusive and sustainable industrialization in Africa. Our sincerest thanks to co-chair of the GMIS initiative, the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology of the United Arab Emirates, with whom we cooperated with closely. We also greatly value the contribution of the co-host of today's Africa regional session, the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Ethiopia. We have long enjoyed a constructive partnership with Ethiopia, most notably through the UNIDO Program for Country Partnership, which seeks to accelerate industrialization in line with national priority. Colleagues, we are convening this regional session of GMIS Digital Series at a pivotal time for Africa. This pandemic has accelerated digitalization and has sped digital transformation with the onset of the fourth industrial revolution. This is a significant development for the African continent as it builds its productive sectors and advances in manufacturing capacities. In 2020, the UNIDO Industrial Development Report found that most African countries play little or no role in the fourth industrial revolution, either as a producer or consumer of advanced technology. The rural regions of Africa also exhibit very low levels of internet access relatively to other regions in the industrialized continent. We must go further to help African countries to make their digital transition without leaving anyone behind. We must build capacities, enhancing digital infrastructure, improve digital skills and access to training, and leverage innovative capacities. Strong partnerships with local and regional partners in business, research, and the government need to be built, as well as with multilateral organizations such as African Union and the regional economic communities, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and the African Development Bank. In recognition of these important needs, UNIDO is partnering with governments and private sector firms to establish smart factories in Morocco to increase geothermal energy supplies through the Internet of Things in Kenya, to improve the transparency in agro-value chains in Ghana, and to combat invasive species through the satellite imaging in Namibia. We're also working extensively within the framework of the third industrial development decade for Africa in order to upscale industrial capacities across the continent and to tap into the strength of African continent free trade area agreement. The innovative ecosystems that span the entire continent must be developed. It will be insufficient to focus on a few leading techno policies. GMIS represents a great opportunity to expand our networks, catalyze transformational ideas, and galvanize innovation regionally and globally. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, your ideas and inputs are valuable, and I look forward to welcoming you to the 2021 Summit in the United Arab Emirates from 22nd to 27th of November. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General, for the overview of the global digital manufacturing landscape. With that, we move on to the discussion panel portion of this session. We have a vastly experienced panel today to reflect on the future needs of Africa in accessing advanced technologies and upscaling digital capabilities, as well as utilizing these to deliver greater value added on the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished panel members. Firstly, we are honored to have Ms. Anna Ekeledo, Director of AfriLabs, which builds a community around rapidly emerging tech hubs, innovation spaces essentially that serve as meeting points and communities for developers, entrepreneurs, and investors. AfriLab has 268 technology innovation hubs. It leads the organization to develop programs and build partnerships that support and work with these innovation hubs and other stakeholders to raise successful entrepreneurs that will stimulate economic growth and social development in Africa. We're also honored to welcome Mr. Garth Strachan, who serves as former member of the Minister of Science and Technology's National Advisory Council on Innovation in South Africa. Mr. Strachan has long-standing experience as a former Deputy Director General of Industrial Development for the South African government and is highly regarded as an expert in the domains of industrial development, capacity building, and the digitization of chains, value chains at that. Similarly, we are honored to welcome Dr. Huda Chakiri, Assistant Professor of Computer Science at Al Akhawain University in Morocco. She founded and has been the CEO of Enhanced Technologies since 2005, an IT company specialized in providing e-government solutions running in more than 130 Moroccan municipalities and provinces. She has worked for more than 15 years, overseeing digital transformation projects and the change that the introduction of ICT brings at the organizational, political, and social levels in local public administrations in Morocco. Now that we have introduced the panel, let's discuss the concrete business of upscaling, digitization, and particularly digital manufacturing in Africa. And Ms. Anna, let me first turn to you. Is it fair to say that the digital hubs in Africa have been concentrated in a few leading countries and cities at this point?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here, among other really high-value speakers as well. Now, I will agree with you and say that yes, a majority of the digital hubs have been concentrated in a few countries and cities. However, we have seen immense growth and decentralization over the past decades. Now, AfriLabs currently has hub members across 191 cities across Africa and across 49 African countries, right? Now, when we started out 10 years ago, we just started with 5 members across 4 countries, right? And all the 4 countries were major countries, and then of course the hubs were in major cities. However, with time, as a community and as a network, we have deliberately grown our network and supported the setup of new hubs in cities outside the major cities and countries. Now, some of the most effective strategies that we have employed and other ecosystem builders that we've seen and we've partnered with have also employed include some of the following, right? So one is capacity building. The availability of resources for individuals who are passionate about supporting young innovators and entrepreneurs to build their ideas into concrete products and concrete ventures and successful ventures, as well as develop the right digital skills, create jobs, is very important, right? So it's important to provide resources to people who are interested in setting up hubs to support their communities. And one of the things we do at AfriLabs, for example, is develop programs and work with other stakeholders to provide these resources necessary to set up, build, and scale a digital hub and provide these supports to digital innovators on the continent. Now, one of our most popular programs, for example, is the AfriLabs Hubs Learning Week, which are quarterly webinars we run to basically provide, and this is a peer-to-peer process, a peer-to-peer capacity building program where experienced hub managers actually come on board and pass along, best strategies and resources and content necessary for individuals who have either started out or even run existing hubs to further scale and support their hubs. And what we've seen is, yes, I mean, we've grown from just 5 cities over the past, 4 cities over the past decade, to over 100 cities across Africa, a lot of them in outside the outskirts of the capital cities and the likes. Now, other strategies include policies. It's important for government to establish the right policies to enable digital hubs and digital innovation, digital manufacturing to thrive outside the major cities. through the provision of infrastructure, right? I mean, infrastructure cannot be overemphasized. I mean, no matter how much we need to innovate, we need access to affordable and accessible and high quality, high speed internet, you know, not just in the major cities, but as you go to any city on the continent, right? It's important to have access to electricity. It's important to have access to road networks. We can't talk about digital manufacturing, for example, if we don't have the right road networks to even access markets or facilitate the movement of people from one location to the other. So even hard and soft infrastructure is very important. Now, funding, it's important to continue to diversify funding and access to funding and finance opportunities from the major cities and countries to other, you know, cities. And this would encourage digital manufacturing to be set up, because, I mean, if there's no funding to even set up or to facilitate or scale, then it's tougher to scale. And even, I mean, one of the things we learned, for example, last year into this year, because of COVID, we ran this program called COVID Action in partnership with the UK government. And basically what COVID Action was focused on was identifying the most local solutions that are manufactured by innovators, even outside the major cities. So what we did is we went completely offline and employed local scouts that were part of our network to source and identify these local innovations. And then we went to the cities, again, outside, so looking at Jos in Nigeria, for example, looking at Kisumu in Kenya, looking at other cities in Tanzania. So looking at cities that ordinary and in Cameroon wouldn't be focused on. And we identified these innovators and we ran capacity building workshops. We provided funding opportunities. And you know what we saw? A lot of these local innovators were skeptical about the opportunities. They said that even when they heard about funding opportunities, they felt they had no chance because most of it went to, you know, the innovators in the major cities and the like. So it's also important to build that confidence and continue to channel resources, funding, capacity building to these innovators, and also support, you know, the setup of innovation hubs outside the major cities. And then, of course, finally, even with the enactment of the African Continental Free Trade Area this year, January, we're all really excited to see it successfully implemented across the continent. Is creating the largest single market on the continent. Is, you know, once you create a market and you create a demand, you know, that has the ability to generate revenue as a result of demand for the product, create jobs, generate income, and create wealth, we will see more digital innovations, the emergence of digital manufacturing. We see more investment as well, both internal local investment and foreign direct investment into the space, you know, because there is that market to actually offtake these products, and it's easier through, of course, as I mentioned earlier, policies, access to funding, road networks to even transport these products established on the continent. So yeah, so these are some of the ways that we've seen have worked and can even work better in decentralizing some of these opportunities and hubs across the continent.
That is quite interesting, the commentary that you share, and particularly the commentary around opportunity presented by the African Free Trade Area. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit more later on in the discussion. But Mr. Strachan, just to bring you in here, so just given the amount of experience that you have working in the manufacturing space, your comment on the standards of digitization presently, as is the case, and I suppose more importantly, the accessibility of the digital revolution to small and medium-sized enterprises.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, and I agree with a lot of what Anna has said, but I'll try not to repeat what she said. I come from an industrial development and industrial policy background, and so my answer to the direct question would be access is mixed, but generally suboptimal, not just for SMEs, but also for larger companies in Africa, and you know, tier suppliers to original equipment manufacturers even would fall into that category. Just a word of some caution from my side, for what it may be worth, is that I think we should be cautious if we suggest that, and I'm not suggesting anybody here is doing so, that SMEs are a silver bullet for industrial and economic development. I think that SMEs are extremely important, but in the absence of addressing the other factors for industrial development, SMEs can flounder because a range of structural problems aren't addressed, and SMEs thrive in circumstances, as Anna has alluded to, where demand factors are strong, and of course supply side factors, support from government. And so I would want to suggest that we also locate a discussion about the new industrial revolution or fourth industrial revolution in developing an African country context very carefully, because African countries generally are stuck in a resource extraction and technology trap. And this has been well documented by UNIDO, UNCTAD, and other institutions. And so unless that trap is broken through structural transformation, the possibilities for SMEs thriving and for digital transformation to take place, I would suggest, are substantially hindered. And so I think, obviously, the digital revolution will bring, greater efficiency, process innovation, supply chain integration, and so on and so forth. But what are the structural issues that have to be addressed? Firstly, we've got to have investment-friendly policy coherence and certainty, and that applies perhaps especially in the current context for data regulation and policy management. Secondly, that we've got to look very carefully at the demand side, not so much for SMEs in the services sector, but SMEs in the real economy, which can break the resource trap. In other words, supporting SMEs in value-added manufacturing processes, in mining, because Africa holds, upwards of 60% of global resources. There are huge comparative advantages in primary agriculture and agro-processing industries. And we have to move to a situation where there is cross-border industrial development integration and not just trade integration. Because in the absence of industrial development and a set of policy levers on the demand and supply side to support industrial development, digitalization in Africa will be very difficult to achieve, including for SMEs. And we've got to look at this, in my opinion, in the sense of what are the opportunities for leapfrogging, and how does the supply side support for leapfrogging get put into place by governments and intra-regional collaboration. And we've got to do this in the context of environmental sustainability. And I'll talk about this later, but I would suggest that Africa, in relation to hydro, renewable energy, has enormous advantages which need to be put in place. So, as Anna has said, the economic infrastructure has to be in place, especially the digital infrastructure, which is cost-efficient access, speed, reliability, geographical spread. Secondly, skills training and capacity building, not just for SMEs, but for large African original equipment manufacturers, so that their supply chains are integrated and digitalized, and that digitalization enables efficient, productive, competitive supply chain management, into which value-added tier suppliers can become integrated. And the public sector, in my view, must provide access to data systems and processes in companies so that they integrate their operations digitally. And this is licensing support for software, hardware, and so on and so forth. And lastly, let me use an example. How does a company located in country X in Africa sell to a company Y based in, let's say, Canada, unless it has a sophisticated or at least optimal process which enables intra-African and global trade? That means it must have item identification, it must have standards and conformity assessment, and the capability to market its products, its cost competitiveness, its ability to provide on-time delivery to the company in Canada. And so, unfortunately, there's no quick fixes. And I think we should avoid the idea that digitalization is going to bring a quick developmental fix to Africa. There are significant opportunities. The enablers need to be put in place, and a digital industrial policy for the individual countries as well as the regions and sub-regions is urgently required. And in my view, lastly, it is absolutely critical for the multilateral institutions such as UNIDO and UNCTAD, but the developed countries need to come to the table other than big picture policy advice. Financial support, especially for sustainable industrial and economic development, is required. Because unless, as we all know, sustainable, equitable, global industrial and economic development is stimulated, the globe is at risk. And developed countries had an opportunity to industrialize where sustainability concerns weren't even on the table. Africa has to develop in circumstances where sustainability issues have to be put squarely on the agenda, and it's behoven on the industrial world to assist in that regard without suggesting that handouts are the answer to these problems. Thank you.
I agree with you. I mean, we just need to take the example of what happened in our country, Garth, as a case in point. When sustainability issues aren't put at the center table, you will have a population that eventually gets frustrated and will act on that frustration, and that resulted in some of the recent unrest that we witnessed in this country as a result of the plight of the poor, the plight of the unemployed, and the plight of the frustrated who had been outside of the economy for perhaps way too long. You do provide a very interesting view on the role of SMEs and even medium-sized businesses services. I mean, in mainstream publications, they are seen as the growth engine or the silver bullet, as you say they are not in terms of growth. But I'm interested in your view, and we'll get to tackling it a lot more. But I do understand the point that you're making to say that they cannot live up to this role if the conditions, the macroeconomic conditions around them and the policy conditions around them are not fixed. We'll tackle that in just a moment. To bring in Dr. Chakiri for her opening remarks on this discussion. And perhaps if you can just provide for us a perspective of what is happening in North Africa and what the situation around the fourth industrial revolution in North Africa is looking like, ma'am.
Thank you very much first for this opportunity and the invitation. And I can second what Mr. Garth and Mrs. Anna just said and explained about the situation. I will first start with a small definition for those terms. Since I have a background of academician, I will just give some definition of these terms that we are using interchangeably, including digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation, and which are slightly different, kind of different, and that people, can keep using mistakenly, as the same term. So digitization is the operations of transforming physical data into digital data, which means, and here we can talk about steps to achieve digital transformation. This is the first step to go toward digital transformation, which is digitization. And digitalization is the process of transforming processes into digital ones. It's not, we already have the data which is digitized, and we want to, and we are in the process of digitizing the process itself, how communication between different entities are going through, how exchange of data is elaborated. And then comes the digital transformation, which is completely changing the business model of companies, whether they are industries, SMEs, middle or medium businesses, etc. So this comes with all a bunch of problems, but also challenges, including infrastructure, political, organizational, social, human. All these aspects are part of how we go or we achieve a digital transformation. Going back to, North Africa. There are different countries in North Africa, including Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria. All have different experiences and kind of levels of achieving, if we can say, digitalization, because we cannot yet talk about digital transformation. And maybe if you asked me this question like a few years ago, I would say that we still have, the road is still big to achieve that. However, the pandemic kind of raised awareness among SMEs, among decision makers about the importance of digital, and we saw many companies showcase of this rapidly changing to digital format, where a lot of people went to telework, and a lot of businesses, otherwise they could have died, or they could have closed the businesses, moved to telework. They offered to their employees the possibility to work from home. They looked for ways to sell products, and the explosion of online shopping has raised in these 2 years in North Africa. In Morocco, we saw how, for example, many companies and businesses offered online goods and products and delivery also. So, I think with the pandemic and what happened recently, there is a hope, a big hope of moving toward a fourth industrial revolution. However, we still need this to be accompanied with, the regulations that need to be adapted and adopted. Policies, of course, protection, because when we move to digital, there is a big threat of security, security threat about, the data that is transmitted and the data that is exchanged. And there is a need on the technical side, but there is also a need of the policies and regulations to make sure in those countries that they accompany businesses into this to protect data exchange. Of course, the infrastructure, for example, if we take the 5G, it is widely deployed in Europe. It is deployed in North America and a lot of countries in Asia. However, in Africa, we still do not talk yet about the 5G. And for example, in Morocco, there is a plan to start deploying the 5G in 2023. And 5G is very important for this fourth industrial revolution. So, there are lots of work still to be done in order to achieve, this digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution.
And then there's the common topic of ensuring that as we digitize or move further into this digital revolution, that we do so inclusively and we do so in a manner that no one is left behind. And Anna, I know that your business works quite a lot with female entrepreneurs. So perhaps just talk to us a little bit about that and the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of work that needs to be done to ensure that female companies in the manufacturing sector do not fall by the wayside.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is something that we've seen in the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, especially in the tech ecosystem on a continent, that we have to be very deliberate about, right? Because there are various barriers to women participation within our ecosystem that range from social barriers, even just from school being, young girls being told that, oh no, you shouldn't study tech courses or, engineering is for boys. It starts at a young age. Up until adulthood, barriers to even access to finance and starting a business, being told that you cannot access to credit, for example, unless you bring a male relative. So there are just all sorts of barriers to women participation in the, innovation ecosystem. However, what we've done, especially as AfriLabs, is being very deliberate in the sort of programs that we designed to attract women. One of it is under our AfriLabs capacity building program, which is supported by the French Development Agency. And under this program, what we've done is that we've actually created a particular category, right, for women, so women support program, right? So we have various categories that range from, connecting entrepreneurs to mentors and investors to digitizing processes and all of that. But then the women category, and then even across categories, so just to say that the fact that we have a women category doesn't mean all the other categories are still tilted towards men. We still ensure that there's a gender balance across board. So our women category, for example, has some really exciting programs being executed across the continent. And some of them is, we have the Female Entrepreneurship Support Program, which is run by a hub in Nigeria, TechQuest STEM Academy, and a hub in Sudan, Junu Hub, which is focused on providing capacity building, training, business support, coaching, and mentorship to women intending to go into business. We have Marana Digital Expert Series, which is run by a hub in Morocco, Dual Tech, which is focused on providing funding and support for female entrepreneurs to regenerate their projects. We have the digitization of women-led businesses in Kenya and Cape Verde, which is implemented by 2 hubs. So some of these projects are cross-regional hubs, which is very important to us, by the way, because we're a Pan-African network, right? And it's important that even as we strengthen individual hubs in each of their countries, we also foster cross-collaboration in the execution and implementation of projects, but even in the exchange of knowledge and partnerships. So under a lot of these projects, we have, the women entrepreneurs also exposed to women entrepreneurs in other locations, right? And what we found is, yes, a lot of the challenges that are faced are quite common, but then solutions are also shared, and these help to also encourage the women. So it's a case of, yes, we face these challenges which are similar across border, but then we also have these solutions which we can, share, which we can support other women entrepreneurs across other countries. We also have other projects that are run across Nigeria, Uganda, Mali. A particularly exciting one in Mali is focused on women agro-entrepreneurs, which as Garth mentioned earlier, it's important to not just focus on, the extraction of resources and all of that, but also value add. And agriculture is one of those sectors on the continent that is huge, in terms of focusing on how we can add value to it, and just doing that in an inclusive way and supporting women entrepreneurs, and seeing how even within digital manufacturing, we can see how to boost that sector, as well as support women entrepreneurs and all. Now, some of the important measures to ensure that we continue to do this inclusively, again, we'll all go back to policies, right? Policies and regulation. Every speaker here has spoken about that. We cannot overemphasize things. No matter how much you pump into an ecosystem, support entrepreneurs, support innovators, the manufacturing industry, SMEs, if we do not have the right policy and regulatory environment, it's tough to do business, right? And we need to continue to put in policies that address the barriers that women face in accessing finance, infrastructure, and also education, right? Education is a very important, in fact, it's a fundamental for any, would I use the word industrialist or entrepreneur, whatever case it is, whether you're on the business side of things, you're on the technology development side of things. And we still have young girls who do not have access to basic education, and that affects them throughout throughout their careers, so, and even businesses, right? You see the difference, of course, between entrepreneurs and a business owner who has, the basic fundamental education and one who hasn't. So it's very important to create policies that would also increase access to, or remove the barriers of access to education for young girls and women. And also in the case of education, encouraging more girls to go into STEM fields, to take courses from science class in school to engineering and other science courses later on. As well, as an ecosystem, it's important to support female entrepreneurs and digital innovators to build strong networks to improve access to finance, as I mentioned, clients, partners, suppliers, one of the things we've seen, unfortunately, is year after year, a higher percentage of total venture capital investments go to men-led teams, right? And just a small percentage goes to female-led teams. So it's important to continue to have those conversations about driving finance to women-led or even co-founded businesses as well. Now, in terms of this decision-making, even though, and a lot of the examples I give cut across board, right? Whether we're talking about digital manufacturing or not, because it's all important, it's all connected. So one is an increased boardroom representation of women, right? Having more leadership roles to deserving women in their fields, right? Including in manufacturing. Ensuring that women are included in the decision-making table. So even as we have these conversations, if we talk about creating policies, we need women to be on those tables in influencing the sorts of policies, because we understand the challenges that are faced and the solutions. We need women to be involved in the design of the interventions. Whatever interventions we're talking about, women should be there, and that's the only way we can design the right interventions. And even in hiring, right? So when we talk about, the teams, for example, are we also gender balanced, in hiring and having the right people across a company, across a firm, from the very entry level up until leadership. I could say that at AfriLabs, we are tilting towards more women actually from the leadership and on our board and across board. We do have more women on the team, so sometimes we do get accused of the opposite actually of gender balance. So so that gender diversity is very important and core to hiring. And of course, expanding the talent pipeline. I mentioned earlier on the importance of encouraging more girls and women to go into technology careers, go into STEM fields, and also creating clearer pathways for women to enter into them. There are loads of interventions on the continent, for example, even run by hubs within our network that are focused on providing digital skills or even coding skills, even at the basic, to young girls, even if it's just summer classes, you know, that all adds up to creating the pipeline and as such, driving inclusivity across board. So yeah, these are just some of the important.
I like how you're laughing at yourself for, you know, the slight bias there at AfriLabs. And it is a bias because, you know, when we talk about this conversation, it's about equality, right? It's not about a boys' club or a girls' club as per se. It's about equal representation. So we're watching you and we're watching you. But
We're trying to fix it too.
To your point around gender mainstreaming and particularly gender mainstreaming in policy, I think that that's also a very important area that you do bring up. And Garth, perhaps if we just speak more about policy here, as Anne was saying, you can pump money into companies or into a lot of startups, but without the right policy framework, you know, you're setting these companies up to fail. And just to go back to the point about SMEs, whether they are the silver bullet to growth or not. Money is coming in the space. And I think we saw that throughout the pandemic. If you just look at what was happening in the US startup scene, a whole lot of money was going into startups, venture capital money going there. And we did see subsequently a lot of listings of these small companies that I think are on the road to become big companies, able to hire and to contribute to the economy. So ideally, you'd want to see the same kind of action here on the continent. And there is appetite for investing in startups already by, you know, venture capitalists and private equity and so forth. But it's about creating more appetite to do so as we look at a continent in which more than half of the young people who can work don't have a job. You say that that's down to policy and the right enabling environment. And you even put suggestions on the table around investor-friendly policies and making sure there's policy coherence and even making sure that development finance institutions also come in board in that financing. So if you know this, I imagine that your colleagues in the space know this. My question is, why isn't this happening? What are the challenges? What are the bottlenecks to implementing this favorable environment?
Thanks very much. And lest I be misunderstood, well, firstly, just to say that, you know, exclusion and inequality and poverty and lack of access to resources for the overwhelming majority of people on the African continent is obviously anathema to sustained development. The second thing is, I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that I'm anti-SME, but I would say that the history of economic and industrial development, economic history, we should look at very carefully in the early, middle, and late industrializers. And demand was created for SMEs in the primary and secondary manufacturing sectors, and of course the services sector. And the old distinctions between services and value-added and primary sectors is increasingly becoming blurred. But in the absence of development, which creates demand in value chains, I would suggest that optimal conditions for the development of SMEs, even with supply-side measures, incentives, and venture capital, would be suboptimal. I also think we need to distinguish between the conditions in developed industrial countries and developing middle or low income countries, which is the norm on the African continent. But I want to make the point that digitalization even applies to the resource sectors such as agriculture. And digitalization must assist productivity and efficiency gains, process and systems integration and innovation, and as I said, supply chain management and delivery efficiency. Let me give you an example, especially for the listeners. Otherwise, this kind of discussion, I think, becomes incredibly theoretical. Mm-hmm. For a company in, let's say, East Africa, exporting an orange to the Tokyo fruit market, it has to be the correct shape, the correct size, the correct color, the correct stage of ripeness, with no phytosanitary residues, with the required standards and conformity assessment, packed in state-of-the-art packing, which we could add needs to be with sustainable products and not plastics, disposable plastics. And it has to be in a sophisticated cold chain and logistics chain to arrive at the Tokyo fruit market a day or two before it is sold. And so I'm making this point because digitalization will affect not just the manufacturing sector, the value-added sectors, and the supply chains which are required for that. And we know those supply chains and value chains are now global, and entry into those global value chains is critical. And unless African companies develop the digital capabilities to enter into those supply chains or value chains, then they will rely on unsustainable domestic markets. And so I think the important point is that we have to get digitalization right. It has to be supported on the demand side and the supply side by governments and private sector institutions in collaborative arrangements. Direct support for SMEs, including training, access is hugely important, but in and of itself alone, it won't achieve industrial and economic development. And there is important policy space, as Anna has correctly said, and at the risk of repeating this, data policy and regulatory coherence and certainty, including in respect of country data sovereignty, is absolutely critical, and the institutions to safeguard data sovereignty, because data is the new gold, and we would be making a mistake if we don't recognize, as even the EU has done in relation to regulating data, that global multinational companies can abuse the data which is mined from African countries. And the support has to be for large, medium, small, and micro companies with respect to access to software, to licensing, to technology transfer and diffusion, And governments have to recognize that the way in which governments function have to be changed. I mean, I can safely speak about my own government, where sometimes one gets appalled that there are paper systems still in place which were probably state of the art in the 1970s. And so, you know, the policy space is there. The regulation requirements are absolutely critical. And I would suggest that governments need to get into the room to ensure that collaboration for investment-friendly investment takes place to secure industrial development, overcome the policy and structural problems in relation to securing that investment, and optimize with supply-side support the opportunities for digital transformation. And I was very interested to hear Dr. Shakiri's definitions, so that we're not left behind as a continent. And this is not going to be a quick fix. It's got to be very significant and difficult work has to take place, which work would hopefully enable, as I suggested earlier, leapfrogging as a result of the capacities that already exist, well thought through transformative policies and regulation, and transformation of government itself. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Dr. Shakiri, I couldn't help but notice you nodding your head as Garth was describing the impeccably high standards we'd have to meet as a continent just to get citrus into Tokyo. And so for the question then becomes around, how we narrow the gap between, the capabilities that we are seeing in more developed and the Western countries to the capabilities presently on the continents and in the emerging space. And this is also against the backdrop to Anne's point about this free trade area deal on the continent that has huge promise. I mean, even in terms of the demand that Garth was talking about, huge promise to deliver on that, given that a lot of the products, the goods and services that, and even the things that we eat that are on the continents are things that are imported from outside. So the demand is there, but it's about the capabilities of ensuring we can feed and entertain and equip ourselves as a combined continent. So your view on building capabilities?
Well, I cannot do something else about, other than knocking and supporting what Garth was talking about, because it goes with my mindset, with what I believe. And I believe that the image is not that dark, because we don't have those legacy systems that maybe we need, that will freine, I don't know how can I translate it to English, that can be like an obstacle for our digital transformation. We have still a lot of things to build, and there are competencies in our countries. There are a lot of competencies, people that are trained every year, engineers, researchers in the IT field, that can help into this digital transformation. Now, the government decision makers need to set up the ecosystem suitable to support this digital transformation, and it cannot do anything else but help this little farmer with just some training and the adequate infrastructure, adequate applications to sell his goods all around the continent and abroad. This unemployed young graduate who is looking for work to look for jobs within his country or outside the country. I mean, this digital support from the government, from the decision makers cannot do other than help the ecosystem to prosper, especially that we have, I mean, technology is very advanced now and we can do a lot of things with it. We have the qualifications, I mean, but still the decision makers need to move on and the infrastructure need to be there in order to enable this digital transformation. Of course, there is a huge also need of training all these digital illiterate people that need also this transition.
Certainly. I agree with you. I think that the training that people are talking about right now is it's lifelong, right? Given that, I mean, even what we have now will probably be very different in the next coming years if we look at the pace in which the digital innovation has been going by. But I'd like to ask the panel for their closing thoughts. So with regards to this particular discussion on capacitating the continent a lot more, on building sustainable manufacturing processes, and on boosting the current pace of the digital revolution on the continent. And perhaps maybe we close the discussion with the practical steps, as Garth was saying, not just the theoretical, but the practicals as to how we solve our problem. Anna?
Okay, so a lot of it will just be in my closing statement to emphasize some of the things I've mentioned already, right? So provision of resources, capacity building resources for people who are across, the manufacturing value chain, right? So whatever we're even talking about, even from the finance side to the technology side, and just the across various sectors. It's very important to do so and integrate these capacity building as well into our curriculums, right? Looking at the education sector, right, into our university degrees and all of that, right? So very important, very practical as well. We continue to say it, the right policy and regulatory environment is very important, creating policies that would ensure that these sectors across board, looking specifically at even at the manufacturing industry and the innovation and technology space can thrive on the continent, and looking at infrastructure, and these are things that are doable. These are things that have been done. We've seen African countries, for example, even in our space, and that startup acts, for example, that make it easier for innovators and entrepreneurs to even set up businesses, to reduce the time to set up a business, to raise financing and all of that. We've seen broadband connectivity. We've seen certain governments prioritize the spread of broadband connectivity, and we just need to see more of that, really. And of course, capacity building activities, both by developmental agencies, by academia, by corporate organizations, by groups as well. I know that we have quite a number of associations, for example, in the manufacturing sectors across Africa. So it's important to strengthen the associations as the associations strengthen their individual members, which are the firms, and then the individual firms strengthen their teams as well, which is sort of the model we use as well as AfriLabs, even as we, as a network organization, strengthen our members, and these members strengthen innovation, innovators and entrepreneurs. We also focus on strengthening ourselves, and we have partners and funders who do that as well. So it's really important to do this across board. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been such an exciting time on this panel, and I've learned a lot as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. And Garth, your concluding thoughts as we wrap up this discussion?
I think Anna's raised a really important point. Lowering the regulatory and entry barriers for SMEs and providing them with supply and demand side support is absolutely critical. This requires, I think, a very important collaborative arrangement between the public sector and private institutions. Very often, unfortunately, post-colonial societies, not just in Africa but elsewhere, have become very investor and business unfriendly by a remarkable array of difficult regulation. I'm not suggesting that regulation isn't important, but it has to be smart regulation. And digitalization allows for smart regulation. And so I think that's a very important point that Anna has raised. I think that we need to perhaps raise a word of caution about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. My view is that it's obviously a step in the right direction, and that the creation of a single market with over 1 billion people is a very important step in the right direction. So lest I be understood, let me begin with that remark. But I would say that equally important is the fact that we've got to secure intra-regional, cross-border investment and production in key value chain. Let's take the automotive sector. South Africa is the biggest automotive producer on the African continent, but even then it's got less than 1% of global production of automotives. Morocco is a new entrant. Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, and other East African countries are getting into this space. It's a dynamic space where collaboration and exploration of complementarities between African countries in production, there's a lot of progress being made, and that can act as an example for other sectors where a global OEM can say, in South Africa, we can produce X model with X local content, but in country X in Africa, we'll produce another model with X localization, and then we will explore trade, intra-African trade for the tier 1 to 4 suppliers for the production of those models. Important work is already happening in this regard. It's got to be explored in relation to other sectors, mining, capital goods, for example, agro-processing capital goods, and so on and so forth. And so clearly digitalization can play a huge role in ensuring that intra-African investment and value chain development is explored in a way that allows leapfrogging. So in the automotive sector, we would have to begin to produce either a fuel cell vehicle or a battery-powered vehicle, where ironically we've got the world's biggest endowment of the minerals required for both hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and lithium battery vehicles. And yet all we do is we export the dirt out of the ground, but the manufacturing value added, the making of the batteries, the making of the hydrogen fuel cells, and the incredible economic multipliers that can come from that, enabled by digitalization, are escaping us. And so Africa, lastly, has enormous resources for hydrogen power, some of the best in the world, which aren't being exploited. In transport, I've mentioned hydrogen fuel cells. And so There are other sunrise sectors. Why are we so slow to take up the hemp sector? Hemp has got 21 industrial applications. It's an alternative to plastic. Africa has got enormous opportunities in relation to land, climate, soil conditions. We need to put in place the other components required, not just for the production of hemp, but for value-added processing and value-added industrial products. So we've also got to look at sunrise sectors. What are those sunrise sectors? Hemp is one of them. How do we ensure an African strategy to ensure that a sunrise sector really takes off, supported by the digital instruments that we know are available? To begin, lastly, Africa has to have a green development path. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the luxury that the early and middle industrializers had. They created smokestack industries for which we are now paying a heavy price in climate change. We cannot afford that. The globe can't afford it. So Africa has to have a green development path enabled by the massive technological and digital leaps that have happened in the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Garth. You conclude with very important remarks there. And I think for me, my key takeaway from what you have said, and if I just sum it up all in one, is ultimately for us to see a change, all stakeholders need to come on board here. It's very important that the public sector does come on board in terms of, providing the necessary policy changes or the business framework to allow for perhaps a change in mindset from the private sector to do a lot more of that beneficiating, as you spoke about here on the continent. I mean, therein lies an opportunity to boost up the current manufacturing that does take place from those investments that follow a positive or favorable environment. And then, as you do say, using the digital tools to allow for that transformation, hopefully the growth that will increase the demand, the domestic demand that you did highlight as a current constraint. But Dr. Chikira, if you could just conclude for us your key takeaways and the final thoughts perhaps that you'd like us to walk away with.
Yeah, I don't want to be long. So besides in addition to what Mr. Garth and Anna said, I would like to add one point that I believe it is very strong, is increase collaboration between researchers, government, and the private sector. I mean, there are not much funds that are going toward academia to do research, because we are trying to find solutions for our continent. And we're relying maybe on solutions that we import from outside, while the solution should come from our researchers, from our minds. And there is a huge need to increase this collaboration between the government, policymakers, and academia, but also some establishing these also bridges between also the private sector and the researchers, and encourage, funding from private sector, big companies that fund research to bring solutions to their problems. So this is, I think, and I believe, one of the points that I can add to the discussion.
And a very relevant point that actually speaks to what many say in solving Africa's problems, being that we can't import solutions that have worked elsewhere. We need to tailor-make the solutions for our own continent. And the issue of increasing a lot more research in the space, I think, is an avenue in which that can be done. But with that said, I'd like to thank you all for your participation and the wonderful ideas and the insights you've provided for for us to, definitely think about in terms of wanting to capacitate the level of the digitization and digitalization, as Dr. Chikuri kindly put it, at presently on the continent, and particularly in the manufacturing space.
Thank you.
Well, that brings our special session of the GMIS digital series on Africa to a close. I hope that you've enjoyed the session and found it as stimulating as I have. We thank you for your interest and hope that you will also join the Summit 2021, which takes place in Dubai from the 22nd to the 27th of November, under the theme of Rewiring Societies, Repurposing Digitalization for Prosperity. We look forward to seeing you there. From myself, Fifi Peters, it's goodbye for now.